Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Philippe Cunningham, and I am the chair of this committee. I'm going to call to order this meeting of the Public Health, Environment, Civil Rights, and Engagement Committee for Monday, January 7th, 2019. With me at the dais are Council Members Cano, Schrader, Gordon, and Council Vice President Jenkins. Please let the record reflect that we have a quorum. Welcome back, everybody, 2019 to the Peace Committee. I've missed you all, so I'm glad to be able to get back to work with you. Today we have 3 items on our agenda, including a quasi-judicial hearing. We will begin with the quasi-judicial hearing and then move to the rest of our agenda. So our first item on the agenda is a quasi-judicial hearing considering the administrative recommendations on cross motions for summary judgment issued by Administrative Law Judge Eric Lipman on November 13, 2018 in the matter of the food law orders issued to Will Winter doing business as Uptown Local Bar. I will first read an advisory regarding the scope of this hearing and then turn the matter over to Assistant City Attorney Joel Fussy to begin the hearing. This is a quasi-judicial hearing for which this committee is limited by law to hearing arguments from the parties to the matter consisting of the Minneapolis Health Department and Will Winter or Mr. Winter's representative. This committee is prohibited from receiving any new evidence or testimony. The parties are required to limit their comments to arguments specifically addressed the record created before the administrative law judge who previously conducted a full hearing on this matter. The parties may not offer, and the committee shall not consider, any new or additional evidence that is not already a part of the record developed by the administrative law judge. This committee has been provided with the entire record of this matter, including the report and recommendation of the administrative law judge. Mr. Fussy, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. Again, for the record, I'm Joel Fussy, Assistant City Attorney, and I represented the Health Department and its food inspectors in this quasi-judicial matter. Also, Dan Huff, the Director of Environmental Health, is present with me this afternoon. The reason that this matter comes in front of you today, and I believe it's the first such matter, at least under this statute that has come before you, is that the matter is essentially an appeal of food code orders issued to a Minneapolis-based establishment, and it's that state law specifically permits anyone who has been issued such orders under the state food code the right to appeal the validity of those orders through an administrative process that involves an appeal being heard by an administrative law judge, commonly referred to as an ALJ, employed by the Minnesota Office of Administrative Hearings. And so in this matter, the respondent, Mr. Will Winter, doing business as Uptown Local Bar, did exercise his right to appeal the food code orders that were issued to him and his establishment by city staff in May of, which is now last year. The ALJ did hear the case in the form of cross motions for summary disposition in October, and he subsequently issued the 12-page very detailed and reasoned recommendation completely affirming all of the orders issued by city staff to Uptown Local Bar as entirely valid, proper, and also constitutional. Pursuant to the state law governing this process, that ALJ recommendation now must come before the City Council, and you are capable of hearing brief argument from both parties before deciding whether to accept and adopt the report and recommendation of the ALJ, which is the request that I make today on behalf of city staff, or whether to modify the report or recommendation. You are not empowered to hear or consider any new evidence, only to hear brief arguments addressing the report and the record as they currently exist. Turning then very briefly to the facts in this matter, I submit that the ALJ's report is extremely detailed and clear, and that its reasoning is entirely sound and appropriate, and that it should be adopted in its entirety. The case involved city staff learning that Uptown Local Bar was operating a facility at 3137 Hennepin Avenue South that was an unlicensed food establishment. The facility promoted itself or held itself out as being a private buyers club for farm fresh foods, including meats, cheeses, fish, honey, coffee, and raw milk, among other food products. Individuals were able to sign up for a membership and then purchase food products at the facility or have them delivered to their homes. However, as is clearly laid out in the ALJ's report, such an operation unequivocally qualifies as a food establishment, as that term is utilized in the state food code. Additionally, the sale of raw milk is plainly illegal pursuant to Minnesota law, with the exception of small quantities purchased for personal consumption and also purchased directly at the farm where the milk is actually produced, which certainly was not the case in this matter. Based on these observations, and after a search warrant was executed at the establishment, a set of state food code orders were issued or was issued to Uptown Locavore. As further detailed in the ALJ's report before you, there were about 6 orders at issue. They range from the unlicensed food establishment operation itself to the raw milk, and also orders embargoing the food products on site based on their improper labeling and their noncompliance with the food code. The ALJ report analyzes all of the orders appealed from and rightly concludes that they are all legal and valid. The report also analyzes several constitutional claims asserted by the establishment and rightly concludes that the orders were also valid and proper from a constitutional perspective. Based on these clear violations identified by city staff and based on the reasoned and detailed analysis conducted by the ALJ in this matter, upholding all of the orders issued by staff, it is our request that you move to adopt the report and recommendation in its entirety, thereby affirming the state food code orders that were issued in this matter. And at this time, I think it would be appropriate to hear from Mr. Winter or his representative if they are present.
Is Mr. Winter or his representative present?
I'm present.
Please come to the dais. Can you say your name for the record, please?
Of course. Mr. Chairman and members, thank you very much. My name is Fritz Kanak. I'm an attorney. I was retained to represent Mr. Winters in this matter just this past week. He had previous counsel who was hired away from this enterprise, unfortunately, for Mr. Winters. And but this is an area that I have worked in the past and have some passion about. I'm retained by what's known as the Farm to Consumer Fund, which is a national organization having to do with maintaining sustainable agriculture on the part of small farms with direct relationships, establishing direct relationships with consumers for their products. And this, in fact, is an organization, for want of a better term, and that's been part of the problem with this case from the beginning, is the need for a better term of what it is that's going on here. You have, as I think the record should reflect, an organization that's been involved with selling products from small Minnesota farms directly to consumers for more than 15 years. And they could have probably gone on another 15 years with this association like this if they hadn't gotten really smart and decided, well, let's do a web page. And it got noticed, and unfortunately, something as creative and as and I would argue in some cases as necessary as this is, but that creative in the sense that you're developing direct relationships without an intermediary to consumers, doesn't fit into any boxes that normally you would expect it to fit into inside the food preparation and the food purchasing chain. I come from Minnesota. I have family that still is engaged in agriculture. And as a direct result of that, I have the benefit of people who have a hog farm, and I get bacon, and I get all kinds of things from these folks that we distribute inside the family, and frankly, friends from time to time, knowing full well where it came from and all the rest of it. Associated, have the fortune, I guess I'd say, of associating with somebody that does have still this kind of direct link. A lot of people don't have that luxury. A lot of people, for whatever reason, are seeking a direct relationship with farmers, and that's what this is about, really. You're dealing with 20 farmers and about 200 families, all told. Not a big organization by any stretch of the imagination. This is not a grocery store. This is not something that's available to the public. This isn't something where they'll post something on the wall outside and say, come on in, we've got a special on pork. This is a situation where people describe their needs, they order it from the farmers, and it is delivered. That is true, for example, of raw milk, the exception that was just stated for you. The purchase is made directly with the farmer. The farmer has the receipt of the purchase, and then the farmer ships as a distribution point to this store. And there are people, and I call it a store, I shouldn't, but for want of a better term, it is a place where this group does then collectively engage in this. This isn't a situation where you're dealing with folks that are surreptitiously bringing in bad beef or anything like that. Will Winter is actually a professional veterinarian. He's in the food industry. He is engaged in this kind of thing, and it's not something that he's making money doing. This is, again, a passion for him, and as it is, I think, for most people that are involved. It's a desire to be able to make it possible for these small farms to be sustainable. And this is a situation where the action of your regulators, who I'm sure are operating in good faith, to shut down this operation will probably put a couple farmers potentially out of business, because they have relied on that direct relationship. They make more money in that direct relationship, and they produce better, fresher food for these particular individuals. Would it be nice if everybody could have that kind of relationship? Well, with a producer, yeah, I think probably, but not everybody can. This is a small group of people that has done that. And so what we're asking you to do in this particular case is to take a leap and to dismiss these assertions and these allegations. Certainly, you could expect Mr. Winter and others to actively participate in any kind of discussion the city would want to have in regulating these kinds of enterprises. This is not, I can assure you, unique. People want to have those kinds of direct relationships with farmers who in turn are looking for these kinds of opportunities. And if the city of Minneapolis were to hold itself out in that regard as an entity that was interested in assisting in these kinds of things, certainly you would have Mr. Winters and others willing to cooperate and do what he could to help. What has been confiscated from him is gone. Obviously, there was some fresh food. He was forced to dump milk and a whole bunch of kinds of things. And again, I can just visualize the scene of adamant employees of the city doing right by public health and making sure that we weren't going to be having all this bad milk and all this bad meat being eaten by all of our consumers in Minneapolis. That's not what this is about. These aren't people that are in the process of trying to sell, trying to get away with anything. It's a direct relationship between farmers and citizens of Minneapolis, although some have come, I'm told, from as far away as 100 miles in order to have the opportunity to be a part of this. But it's a small group, it's a finite group. They're not interested in expanding. This isn't going to become the next Whole Foods. They're just interested in continuing to be able to have the relationship that they have had with these farmers.
Mr. Cock, if you could start to wrap up your...
I'm wrapped up.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. All right. From here, I'll open it up to my colleagues. Are there any questions or comments? Councilmember Gordon.
I'm just curious if we would have had a license that they could have applied for to operate the way they were operating. Maybe Mr. Fussy can.
Mr. Chair, committee members, certainly they qualified, it was the determination of our staff and the ALJ that they qualify as a food establishment, which does require licensure. I don't believe the way that they were operating would have been, there would be a license category available for that, however. I don't want to say, I mean, there could be some sorts of transactions if they're directly, if it is the farmer himself. We have farmers markets, we have other avenues, but I don't know if there's an existing rubric that would fit the sets of the facts set particular to this case.
Thank you, I appreciate that. And it seemed a little bit when I was reading it that they could have potentially applied for that license, and then they could have modified their business plan so that they could fit in and continue operating somehow within those parameters, but they chose not to, and they apparently didn't want to.
I would just add, again, I wouldn't speculate as to what they could have modified themselves into. I'm just speaking that the operation as it existed, does not fit the current requirements, but certainly, I don't want to get into speculating about how it might be modified, but there are other options and avenues that could be explored. I don't have an easy fit, however, to offer at this point.
Right, and I wasn't asking you to.
Yeah.
If you could stay there, actually, I have a question for you. So within the current business model, it's a buyer's club that isn't necessarily looking to expand. Even within that model, would they still need a food establishment license for that?
Certainly, yes. Under the way they were operating as a buyer's club, in which memberships were accepted, that would qualify as a food establishment, and they would need a license. It's kind of a matter of economies of scale, but Costco is a private buyer's club as well. And, however, obviously the dynamics are a bit different there.
No, great. I just wanted to make sure that we had that clarification. Council Vice President Jenkins.
Thank you. I guess my statement is more of a comment than necessarily a question, but I guess I would be really concerned, and it's not necessarily. Well, yes, they were operating a food establishment without a license, but it also seems to me at issue is what they were selling, and particularly the raw milk, which is prohibited by state law. And I would be concerned that if we were to allow an establishment to operate, what would stop others from pursuing this kind of situation? I mean, it seems that one option, as it were, could be to actually go to the farm. I mean, they have these relationships with the farmers. I don't think there is a restriction for that if they went directly to the farm and they wanted to take the health risk of drinking raw milk, then that would be an option. But as it stands, I think this would create a host of other issues that we are not prepared to deal with.
Thank you.
Councilmember Schrader.
Thank you. I just want to echo what the Council Vice President said. Like, this is pretty clearly against the law. I really think there's a lot of sympathy for the business model. I think that we need to be thinking a lot more about how our food systems work in the city, how we have all communities have access to healthy food. So I'd love to sit down and have those conversations and make sure that some of these businesses could fit in. But the fact is that they don't fit in right now, and I didn't see a lot of work from the owner's part to work with the city to make that work.
All right. Any other questions or comments from my colleagues? Thank you, Mr. Fussy. Seeing no further comments or questions, I move approval of the report and recommendations on cross motions for summary judgment issued by Administrative Law Judge Eric L. Lippman on November 13, 2018, in the matter of the food law orders issued to Will Winter doing business as Uptown Local Bar, docket number 8-6010-35378. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and that carries. Our next item on the agenda is we have a consent item accepting a grant from Hennepin County in the amount of $15,000 for Minneapolis Health Department school-based clinics to cover non-insured Minneapolis adolescents at one of its 7 school-based clinics, and a passage of resolution approving appropriations of those funds to the health department. Do any of my colleagues have any comments or questions on this item? Council Vice President Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair Cunningham. And I'm not sure if this is an appropriate question for this time, but I'm just curious if Ms. Musicant can address how the governmental shutdown may impact some of the grant funding for the health department, and if this is not appropriate for this.
This is a perfect time.
Okay,
No
thank
worries. Commissioner Musicant?
Yes, good afternoon. Gretchen Musicant, Commissioner of Health. I'm not prepared to give you a deep answer to that, Mr. Chair, Madam Jenkins. But I do know that the portion of the government's budget that is subject to the shutdown does not include most of the health areas, because there was a budget proposal already passed that funds health stuff. Now, that's a general overall statement, and there will be ripple effects and you know, downward spirals and subcontracting that probably will be impacted, but generally we're not feeling the first wave of impact. The rest that I know is from listening to the news, so that's probably not what you asked me up here to tell you about.
Thank you very much, Ms. Muscat.
Thank you so much. Any other comments or questions? All right. Seeing none, I move approval of this item. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and that item carries. Our final item on today's agenda is a discussion item. It is receiving and filing a report on recommendations from the Northern Metals Advisory Committee, and we have Commissioner Musicant to give us a presentation of that?
Yes.
Great. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. Again, I'm Gretchen Musicant, Commissioner of Health. This presentation is going to go a little bit into depth on the consent decree because it happened before some of you were in office, and so that might just help give you a sense of how we got to this place. First, I'd like to recognize Lisa Smested for her leadership in this work and really her ability to help convert committee recommendations into action. And if you ask me a lot of detailed questions, I'll probably turn to her to help me answer. So the Northern Metals Consent Decree began, the story begins in 2016 when the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency discovered there was an unpermitted source of air pollution at Northern Metals. And they moved to revoke their operating permit for violating their operating conditions. And as a result, Northern Metals plans on moving its shredding facility out of Minneapolis at the end of 2019. Until that move is completed, they will be expected to live up to their performance testing agreement and remain in compliance. And we have checked recently, and they continue to be in compliance. So as a result of that action, there was also a consent decree between Northern Metals, the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, and the City of Minneapolis as an intervener. And you will see on this slide total settlement of $2.5 million. The smallest portion of which, but it's not the smallest, I guess it isn't. $600,000 of which is to address health mitigation in the City of Minneapolis. The consent decree gave some guidelines as to how that money should be expended, and the city agreed with those guidelines. It's to be used solely for mitigation projects in North and Northeast Minneapolis, and they shall include projects in the impacted neighborhoods, and there's a subsequent action by the council to name those neighborhoods. To do four things. One is identify and educate at-risk residents on asthma triggers. Second, enroll families with children suffering from poorly controlled asthma in a new asthma trigger mitigation program. 3, implement community and block-by-block blood lead level screening events in cooperation with local clinics, which will offer follow-up venous blood screening as needed, And 4, identifying and connecting affected individuals with resources to help reduce environmental exposure to lead. The council then took action to create a community advisory committee, the Northern Metals Advisory Committee. And that was in September of 2017. And the group was to provide recommendations to myself to best implement the 4 projects that I just outlined for you in the consent decree, and to define the impacted communities and how to identify and educate at-risk residents, and how to identify and reach the families of children with asthma, and how to conduct lead screening events. There were to be up to 18 members of the committee from Sheridan, Bottineau, McKinley, and Hawthorne neighborhoods. And there's a single term. People are appointed to serve from December 1st, October 1st, 2017 to December 31st, 2020. So before we began, we knew that it would be helpful to have facilitation, and we did not spend settlement funding on this, but we worked with the Hennepin County CAP agency and leveraged some funding to identify facilitation services. Those facilitation services will also be available to the Northern Green Zone, so it's a kind of a win-win for us as a city. And the facilitator is mentioned there, Public Policy Project. I don't know if anyone's come in the door from there, no, but you can see who they are. And the committee members, you can see from the Hawthorne, McKinley, and Sheridan neighborhoods. Anyone here from the advisory committee? A couple members of our advisory committee. There were no applicants from Bottineau, so we did not have representation from that community. And then the health department appointed 3 additional members, which are named there as well. We had originally imagined that we would have 4 meetings to do this work, and instead we had 8. But that gave us a chance to really get to know one another, dig into the issue, and really parse out the stories and think about what are the lessons that the community members are bringing forward. You'll see at the bottom of that slide there is a web page where you could go and read all the notes from the minutes if you'd like to do that. Just a little geography orientation. This map includes quite a bit of overlaid information. So the yellow, orange, red dots or squares are blocks where there has been a high lead level identified. The green areas are our north and south green zones. And then the dark outlined area are the 4 neighborhoods that the City Council named as part of the advisory committee creation and in response to the Northern Metals consent decree. And then you can see there's a little tiny factory in red in the middle of that area that shows where Northern Metals is located. So the committee identified 3 main guiding principles that really have led us to the recommendations, the specific recommendations today. One is that 50% of the settlement be spent on providing services, so paying for professionals who have information to share, or outreach workers, or people who want to follow up and come into the homes and make sure people know how to use the supplies. And 50% of the settlement shall be used on participant incentives and benefits to families. They also recommended that 2/3 of the funding be spent to address asthma, because there are fewer programming approaches that are going on in the community around asthma, and more activity around lead, so that the settlement dollars, only 1/3 of them will be spent on lead. They also did not want the settlement dollars to be spent to offset or pay for city staff time. So here are the recommendations. The first 4 bullets really correspond to those 4 areas in the consent decree. the asthma outreach and education, and you can see the amount, $92,000, and then underneath that, how it's broken out between participant dollars that are shared with participants and dollars that are used for professional information and outreach. Asthma mitigation, then after the outreach and education, kind of coming into the homes, and I'll talk about each of these more in the subsequent slides, is a little over $308,000. Lead poisoning prevention education, $75,000, and blood lead testing, a little over $124,000, all totaling up to $600,000. In addition to that, we looked at the amount of services that we are likely to provide already with other dollars in that same catchment area, along with the additional investment we'll be making in helping with research and evaluation. And so our in-kind health department leverage dollars are $184,000. So the first area is asthma outreach, and we plan to do 80 small group education events, estimated about 5 families per event, so serving 400 families. And just a reminder, this is to be spent over essentially a 3-year period. The attendees will be recruited through schools, clinics, emergency rooms, hospitals, and urgent care centers, and will receive an incentive for participating in the education. Asthma mitigation, so we estimate that we will be able to help 360 families, and there will be an in-home consultation with a professional who can look for what are some of the triggers that are available here, what are some of the modifiable aspects of the home. That will be followed with 1 or 2 visits from a community health worker to help people really think about how to use some of the resources that are made available. Some of those resources may or may not include, and this depends on what the conditions are in the home, special high filter vacuum cleaner, air filter, covers for pillows, mattresses, an extra inhaler if a child needs an additional one to be at school as well as home, those kinds of things. The lead education, we expect to reach out to 300 families and would have a gift card to go for families who welcome into their home a community health worker to provide some in-home lead poisoning education. We heard repeatedly that it's not that easy to say yes to someone coming into your home, and there are concerns about what else is going to transpire. We certainly need to build trust, but also taking into account that people's time is worth something, and exchanging something of value for that visit was recommended. And then finally, blood lead testing. So we plan to have 21 testing events, which will include having a mobile laboratory, doing some capillary testing right on site, possibly doing venous blood sampling right there as well. Doing outreach before each of these events, so we're really going to focus in on the community and try and pull people in a small catchment area. And then for every child that's under 6, lives within the designated area, and is due for a lead test, we would not only do the lead testing, but provide an incentive as well. So the next steps are capitalizing on 2 master contracts that the health department has to expedite the implementation of these recommendations. We'll be working through the neighborhood hub and sustainable resource centers, and they in turn could do it or subcontract with others. We will also we had, because of all these meetings, and I think just the design of a discussion of this size, you have recommendations that fall outside potentially of the consent decree, and so we thought about that ahead of time and said, those are great ideas, let's forward those to the green zone. And so any of those recommendations will be forwarded that fall outside of this consent decree will go to the green zone. And then the committee will continue to meet as needed, receiving reports, giving input to the evaluation design, overseeing expenses, and so on. And the Pollution Control Agency will continue to receive annual reports, and our research division will develop an evaluation plan and begin to implement that. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Do any of my colleagues have any comments or questions? Councilmember Gordon.
I just wanted to take a moment to appreciate all the work and effort that went into this. I think originally when we got the consent decree, we imagined it might be simpler. We even imagined, maybe City Hall could make this decision because we kind of have a good idea about how we could help folks, in our usual kind of MO. But we stopped and we waited and we listened, and I think that it was right of us to create this advisory group. And I know it was a big expectation to put on staff and also on community volunteers to get together and do that work. I was also really grateful to the CAP agency for being willing to help support and bring some resources to the table as well. I think that helped a lot. And apparently you all had to double the number of meetings you went to kind of work all this out. But I really am impressed with the recommendations too. I think it makes sense. I think it kind of some creative and innovative ideas. It probably pushed us to do a lot more outreach, a lot more engagement than we would have otherwise. This idea also of kind of incentivizing with gift cards, I think it makes a lot of sense and exactly the right thing to be doing in this way. So I really appreciated seeing those. And I actually think we should approve the recommendations as well as receive and file. I know on the agenda it says receive and file, but this is a court matter. This is expending our city money, and I think that at the council level we should approve them. So I'm happy to make a motion to do that or wait till after we have some more discussion as well. Thank you.
Okay. Madam Clerk.
Chair Cunningham, Councilmember Gordon, you can certainly move to approve them and or receive and file. I mean, approve would kind of work over the top of a receive and file, and I'll just move forward to council to be considered at the full council.
Would you like to make that motion?
Sure. I move to I'm going to still move to receive and file this report and approve the recommendations from the advisory group.
All right, we have a motion on the table for receiving and filing as well as approving the recommendations of the Northern Metals Advisory Committee. Do any of my colleagues have any other questions or comments? Well, before we vote on the motion, I want to make sure I take a moment to also say thank you to city staff for your work on this, as well as community. I've had a lot of Northsiders come and talk to me about the work, and really being able to be a part of the city process is a growing pain when there's been such a breakdown in trust between the community and the institution that we represent. And so when we go out into the community and do the work, and so there are opportunities like this where we can have the chance to be able to actually begin to repair some of that harm, because we as the intervener are saying we care, we're going to be stepping into this, and also where we are able to within the law, we are able to give agency and autonomy and have the community do some hard choice work where there's actual deliberations and tough conversations. The growing pains are good. That's how we learn, and that's how we do better for the next time and then the next time. I think the work that's been done here has been really, really solid. So thank you to everybody who's helped organize it, who's helped keep it on track, even though it can be tough. Northsiders, we're a tough bunch sometimes, and so being able to keep us all together, keep us moving, is a talent in of itself. So thank you very much, folks, for all of that, and thank you to the community for their time, their flexibility, and their passion for the work. And on that note, seeing no further comments or questions, all those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it, and that motion carries. Thank you so much. And before we adjourn, I just want to remind everybody to check out LIMS, L-I-M-S. This is for the riveted viewers at home. Make sure you check out to see what's going on in City Council, as well as reach out to your City Council representative and make sure that your voice is heard. And on that note, seeing no further business before this committee, we are adjourned.